An Ohio cold case from 1984 has finally been solved, and the arrest has stunned a small Dayton town. It happened just after sunrise on a cold March morning. Frost still silvered the lawns on Greenwood Avenue. A thin wind slid through bare maple branches and set a porch flag to snapping. Two unmarked sedans rolled to a stop, their engines cut. The street fell quiet in that special way it does right before something changes. A front door opened. A man in a flannel shirt stepped out onto the concrete stoop. He blinked into the blue light. He saw badges. He saw paper. He heard his name. Harold Brenner, 71, retired machinist, 4 decades on these same blocks, known for sharpening mower blades in his garage, known for lending a ladder and never asking for it back. He raised his hands because a detective asked him to. Steel cuffs closed with a sound that neighbors felt in their teeth. The body camera caught the slight flinch in his shoulders. The red porch bulb buzzed. A dog 2 houses down barked once, then twice, then would not stop. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. The name is Mary Lou Jenkins, 23, first-year teacher, newly married. She lived 4 blocks from Greenwood Avenue in a second-floor apartment with thin windows and a view of a corner store that sold coffee for 50 cents, July of 1984. That was the last summer she carried a canvas tote full of graded worksheets and stickers. That was the summer she did not come home. Her photo has been in an evidence binder for most of your life. Brown hair, clear eyes, a smile that looks like a promise. For years that photo sat between manila tabs and carbon copies. For years it rode across desks, as detectives changed and captains retired. But it never left the building. It never left the room. The outcome is simple to say out loud. Investigative genetic genealogy took a tiny scraping from beneath Mary Lou's fingernails and built a family tree. The tree narrowed to one branch. That branch pointed to Harold Brenner. A coffee cup collected from his curb confirmed it. One in a number so large a person cannot hold it in a sentence. A judge signed a warrant. Detectives knocked. A town watched. Here is why it matters. Those fingernail scrapings were taken the day of the autopsy. The coroner noted them in tidy script. He sealed them in a small envelope and wrote the case number twice. The bag went to storage with a box of other small things. Time did its slow work on all of it. Glue dried, tape loosened, voices faded. The scrapings stayed. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you are in the right place. Detective Dana Keller found them during a cold case audit in 2024. She runs her hand along every shelf. She checks seals and dates. She looks for anything that might still speak. She lifted the Jenkins envelope with both hands like a person holding a baby bird. The seal was clean. The chain of custody was perfect. She sent it to the state lab with a short note that said, "Can we try?" The lab answered with science and care. A technician teased DNA from the scrapings. Not much. Enough. The first pass through the criminal database returned no hit. That happens more often than not. So Keller tried the new route. She uploaded a cleaned profile to a genealogy service used by investigators. She watched as distant cousins lit up the screen. Names in states that ring like a train map. Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan. The family tree grew. The branches crossed. The matches narrowed to a single living male in Ohio. The name on the screen made Keller stop breathing for one count. She knew the neighborhood. She knew the old address list. 4 blocks. That is all that separated Mary Lou and Harold in 1984. They might have shopped at the same store. They might have waited at the same red light. He was interviewed back then in a door-to-door sweep. No record, no priors, no reason to hold him. He went back to mowing his lawn. The case went cold. The arrest brought the past into the present, like a door blown off its hinges. Reporters found the block within an hour. They knocked on neighbors' homes with polite knuckles and urgent eyes. Who is he? What is he like? Did he ever say anything about that girl? People searched their memories like they were flipping through a drawer. One man remembered a snowstorm from the 80s. One woman remembered a borrowed rake. A teenager filmed the whole thing on a phone and texted it to a group chat that grew by the minute. Inside the house, a woman stood frozen in the doorway. She has been married to Harold for a long time. She said his nickname in a voice that tried to be normal. She watched the cuffs go on. An officer told her where they were taking him. She nodded like a person takes a blow. She told a detective that her husband leaves early on Saturdays to buy donuts for the grandkids. She said he is kind. She said he is steady. She said these words like laying down cards and hoping the deck will change. The micro details of arrest day stick. The breath of a detective fogging in the cold. The small squeak of a cruiser seat as a suspect slides in. The smell of gasoline and last night's rain. A neighbor's porch light that flickers because the bulb is loose. You will see those on the footage. You will hear them under the narration. They are the sounds of a shift. They are the sounds of a 41-year wait snapping into a new shape. The department briefed the press that afternoon. The podium looked too small for the weight of the news. Keller stepped up and kept it plain. She said the words, genetic genealogy, so that anyone could repeat them at dinner. She held up a photo of the envelope that held the fingernail scrapings. She did not hold up the scrapings. She explained that the match from the coffee cup confirmed the family tree. She thanked the lab. She thanked the Jenkins family for patience that no family should ever need. One reporter asked the first hard question. Could the DNA be incidental? Could there be some benign contact? Keller answered in one line. DNA under fingernails is not like DNA on a countertop. That is contact from a struggle. That is a victim fighting. That is a mark that says, I tried. She let the words sit. The room stayed quiet. Another reporter asked a second hard question. Is there any other DNA? Keller did not hide what they had found. Tests on a scarf near Mary Lou's neck revealed a second partial male profile. It was incomplete. It did not match anyone in the known databases. It might be transfer. It might be a rescuer. It might be a second person who touched the fabric at a different time. They do not know. That is the piece that still wakes people up at 3 in the morning. That is the thread the mind cannot stop pulling. Back on Greenwood Avenue, life pretended to go on. A mail truck rattled past. A kid kicked a soccer ball against a fence until a parent told him to stop. The porch where Harold had stood looked exactly the same by nightfall, and also not the same at all. The air held that aftertaste neighborhoods get when the news trucks leave, but the story does not. You can feel it if you have ever lived through it. It sits on the tongue. It asks questions with no verbs. You should meet the people who carried this for years. Keller kept the case file on the corner of her desk, always within reach. The first detective back in 1984 wrote a note in the margin of a page that turned brittle with time. She fought him. Hard. Those 3 words never left the file. They rode forward. They made the fingernail scrapings sacred. They made the lab careful. They made the chain of custody a kind of promise. You should also know the family. Mary Lou's younger sister, Elaine, was 17 that summer. She kept her sister's school ID card in a jewelry box that still smells faintly of talc. The photo shows a smile that people still remember in the present tense. When the call came about the arrest, Elaine took the card out and set it on her kitchen table next to a cooling cup of tea. She touched the edge with one finger. She said she did not realize how heavy the waiting was until something finally lifted. Arrest is not the end. It is a door. On the other side are more questions than any script can answer in one act. Where was Harold on the night Mary Lou died? Who can place him? Who remembers his car? Did anyone notice him changing a routine the week after? Did anyone wake up in the night because a feeling crawled up the spine and wrote a warning on the back of the brain? Those questions are coming. Those names are coming. This is the part where we build the case. But hold on this for one more beat. The smallness of the clue that changed everything. A trace you could balance on the head of a pin, collected by habit, sealed by training. Kept cold by a line item in a budget nobody remembers voting on. Reopened by an audit that could have been skipped, turned into a name by a tool that did not exist when the evidence was first bagged. The math of that is not poetry. It is process. It is also a kind of grace. The legal wheels start turning, the hour a suspect is booked. A prosecutor reads the lab reports line by line. A judge reads the affidavit and checks the boxes and thinks about the news cameras that will stand outside the courthouse steps. A defense attorney scans the chain of custody for any break, any smudge, any fingerprint that should not be there. The word contamination will leave someone's mouth. The word transfer will leave another. The jury pool is already hearing about it at dinner and on the commute. This is how modern cases live in public before they live in court. In the station, Keller logged evidence with a steady hand. She watched new techs bag items from the Brenner home, a rusted toolbox, a pair of old work gloves. Folders that will be searched for news clippings or handwritten notes. One paperback with a folded page that might mean nothing, or everything. The team took photographs of the garage and the basement and the truck bed. They took measurements. They looked for trace they could test. They left blue booty prints in dust that no one had disturbed in years. Neighbors will talk, and you will hear their voices in this story. Some will defend him, because that is how memory works when it has to protect itself. One will say he babysat their dog. One will say he handed out candy on Halloween and did not seem strange. One will pause, then share the thing they kept in a drawer. He watched the school fence some afternoons a little too long. He stood in his yard when he did not need to. He stared through people the way you look through glass. A solved case has a shape. It starts with an outcome. It moves through a method. It lands on a door. We are at the door. Behind it is the town as it was in 1984, the last normal day. The timeline that went from tidy to torn. The rush of the first hours when hope still had a voice. The rumors that bloomed like weeds after rain. The long winters where the file sat still but did not sleep. Before we step through, remember the cadence that matters to families. Justice can be late. Justice can be thin. Justice can also be stubborn. It arrives in ordinary envelopes with ordinary seals and changes everything. One overlooked clue. One investigator who would not let go. One morning on a quiet street where cuffs clicked and a town stopped breathing for a second that felt like a year. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you are in the right place. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. Mary Lou Jenkins grew up on the east side of Dayton, 2 blocks from Linden Avenue Baptist. Her parents owned a corner grocery with a red Coca-Cola sign that squeaked in the wind. She stocked shelves after school, humming along with the radio that never seemed to change stations. She graduated from Chaminade-Julienne High School in 1979, voted most dependable. Dependable was the word everyone still used when they spoke her name. By the summer of 1984, she was 23, newly married, and certain the world made sense. She had a bachelor's degree in elementary education and a classroom full of third graders who adored her. Her husband, Tom Jenkins, worked nights at the GM plant on Woodman Drive, saving for a house they planned to buy before winter. They rented the upstairs of a brick duplex near a grocery store and a laundromat that always smelled faintly of detergent and fryer oil. The landlord lived downstairs and watered his garden with the same green hose every evening at 6. Mary Lou's mornings started early. She brewed coffee, packed Tom's lunch, ironed her own blouse until the collar lay flat. She wore perfume that smelled like apples and chalk dust, a combination her students later said reminded them of safety. She carried a canvas tote painted with tiny daisies hand-done by one of her students' mothers. Inside were lesson plans, stickers, and a folded note from Tom that simply said, "Friday our night." It was a quiet life, small by design. She liked routine, and Dayton, in the mid-'80s, rewarded routine. The city was still heavy with factory air, steel, oil, bread from the bakery downtown. Families ate dinner at 6, watched Wheel of Fortune at 7, went to bed by 10. People left their car doors unlocked when they ran into the store. That sense of safety was as much a part of the town as the streetlights. Mary Lou believed in the goodness of people. When a neighbor's car wouldn't start, she offered jumper cables and stayed until the engine turned over. She brought cupcakes to every church bake sale. She wrote thank you notes on pastel stationery and tucked them under windshield wipers. Her world was small, yes, but it was full. And in the summer of 1984, she was certain it would stay that way. Tom Jenkins remembers that year in fragments: the smell of motor oil on his hands, the faint whistle of trains at night, the way Mary Lou's laughter could cut through the static of the TV. He worked the swing shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which meant he often kissed her goodbye at 9:30 and returned home just as the morning news played. They passed each other like tides, one coming home, one leaving. But they were happy. He told reporters later that he used to keep a tally on the fridge, days until their first anniversary. There were 19 squares left to check when she died. That summer, Dayton baked under record heat. The grass turned brittle, the river shrank back from its banks, and everyone left windows open to coax in the night breeze. The Jenkins apartment had a single box fan in the window that whirred constantly, rattling a rhythm that became background noise to their lives. Downstairs, the landlord's television murmured baseball games late into the night. The neighborhood felt close too, close sometimes but safe. Mary Lou's sister Elaine often visited on weekends, bringing gossip and leftover pie from their mother. She would tease Mary Lou about her teacher wardrobe, always knee-length skirts, sensible shoes. Live a little. Elaine would laugh. Mary Lou would smile and say, "I live plenty." She meant it. At school, she had a reputation for patience. She never raised her voice. She knew the names of every student's siblings and pets. When one child's father lost his job, Mary Lou quietly paid for the field trip fee out of her own pocket. When a colleague asked why she stayed late every Thursday, she said, "Someone's got to make sure tomorrow runs smooth." That Thursday habit would become the pivot of the entire timeline. People remember small things when tragedy comes calling. They remember the last laugh, the last phone call, the last sighting under a streetlight. In Dayton, everyone who knew Mary Lou could tell you what she was wearing that week: a cream-colored blouse, a simple gold cross on a chain, and that canvas tote with the daisies. She was the kind of person whose details stuck. The city itself was caught between eras. Factories were closing, families were moving, but the East Side stayed mostly unchanged. It was a world of screened porches and mailboxes with painted names. Kids rode bikes until dark, cutting through alleys that smelled of cut grass and gasoline. On weekends, couples filled the diner on Greenwood Avenue, drinking bottomless coffee while jukeboxes played soft rock. Everyone thought they knew everyone else. That illusion would cost them dearly. When investigators looked back later, they realized how visible Mary Lou's routines had been. Her route to school never varied. Her errands happened the same day each week. She parked in the same spot behind the duplex, the one partially hidden by lilac bushes. She walked to the corner store most nights around 7:30 for milk or bread, or just to stretch her legs. She moved through the world as if nothing bad could find her, as if the city itself was a shield. Dana Keller once said, "The saddest part of cold cases is how ordinary the victims' lives were before the line breaks. They never know they're in a story," she told a reporter. "They're just living their Tuesday." Mary Lou's Tuesday was no different. She graded spelling tests. She called her mother. She kissed her husband goodbye. And then, she disappeared. But before the disappearance, there was a life worth remembering. On Sunday afternoons, Mary Lou and Tom sometimes drove to the river to feed ducks. They'd sit on the hood of the Toyota and talk about buying a house in Kettering, maybe starting a family. Tom would sketch small floor plans on napkins. Mary Lou would circle where she wanted her classroom bookshelf to go. She dreamed of teaching until she was old, of watching generations pass through her doorway. That is what was taken from her, the long future of small, good days. Neighbors recall seeing her that final week more than usual. She had been delivering thank you notes to families whose children had brought end-of-year gifts. One neighbor, Mrs. Harper, remembered that Mary Lou stopped to admire the hydrangeas and said, "Maybe next summer I'll plant some of my own." The phrase haunted Mrs. Harper for years. Next summer. It's the kind of line that turns into a ghost. In Dayton, in 1984, the police department ran out of typewriter ribbons twice that year. Paperwork piled on desks in towers. There were burglaries, minor assaults, the usual noise complaints. Nothing that prepared anyone for what would come. When Mary Lou went missing, officers treated it at first like another domestic misunderstanding. A newlywed argument, maybe a brief runaway. The idea of murder didn't fit. Not there. Not her. But inside every quiet neighborhood is the possibility of someone watching. Someone who studies the rhythms. Someone who notices who comes home late and who leaves a window open. Years later, investigators would piece together that Harold Brenner lived 4 blocks away during that same period. He clocked in at the machine shop by 6 a.m., clocked out at 3:30, and spent evenings alone in his garage. He had no record, no complaints, nothing to suggest darkness. Just another face in the crowd that waved and nodded and seemed harmless. When Keller reconstructed the timeline decades later, she walked the same path Mary Lou used to take. From the duplex to the corner store, past the small park, down to the street where Brenner's old house still stood. She said the walk took 9 minutes. She said it felt too quiet. You could hear your own footsteps echo off brick. She said it was easy to imagine how someone could wait unnoticed. That's how Chapter 2 of this story fits together. A life rendered in small, perfect loops, a city too trusting, a predator hiding in plain sight. The details seem simple, but every detail is a hinge. The porch light that burned out the week before. The window that stuck open. The routine that never varied. Mary Lou's students kept a scrapbook after she vanished. They filled it with drawings and notes written in uneven handwriting. One page said, "We will be good so you come back." Another said, "I hope you are not scared." Those pages still sit in a box in Elaine Jenkins's attic, the crayons faded but the words intact. They are the purest record of who Mary Lou was, someone whose absence hurt even children who didn't fully understand why. Elaine herself carried guilt for years. She had planned to visit that weekend but canceled because of car trouble. She told reporters she still wonders if her presence might have changed something, if her voice at the door would have interrupted the moment when danger arrived. That's how families live after the fact on questions without answers. The what-ifs multiply until they fill every silence. The house on Greenwood Avenue still stands. Different tenants, different paint, but the same windows. The neighbors say sometimes in July, when the air is thick and the cicadas start up, you can hear the faint creak of the upstairs floorboards through the open windows, as if someone is still walking that short hall from the kitchen to the living room. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's the way old wood settles when the heat rises. Or maybe stories like this leave an echo that never quite fades. Detective Keller keeps a copy of a photo of that house pinned above her desk. Not the crime scene photo, the ordinary one taken from a property record. It reminds her that victims aren't defined by what was done to them, but by the lives they built before it. Every time she looks at that porch, she sees the promise of an ordinary evening, a porch light glowing, a young woman grading papers, a city believing nothing bad can cross its borders. That illusion is what Chapter 3 will break. Because the last normal day for Mary Lou Jenkins began like every other. Coffee. Kiss. Goodbye. The fan in the window humming. The clock ticking. The world still whole for a few more hours. Morning came to Dayton thick with humidity. The kind of morning when the sky looks pale and tired before noon. It was July 17th, 1984. A Tuesday. Mary Lou Jenkins' last ordinary day. She woke at 6:15 to the smell of coffee. Tom had already started the pot before leaving for his early shift. On the counter sat a note, written in blue ballpoint. "Be safe. Love you, see you at 9. She smiled, folded the note into her wallet, and went about her routine. The details of that morning have been reconstructed so many times by investigators, journalists, and her family that they've become almost ritual. Each act, coffee, hair, keys, tote, feels sacred because it was the last time she performed it. Her downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Harper, later told police she heard the pipes hiss as Mary Lou showered. Then the faint click of heels across the upstairs floor. Then music's soft, tinny radio from the kitchen. A weather forecast. Highs near 90. Scattered storms after sunset. At 7:30, Mary Lou stepped onto the porch, wearing a cream blouse and a floral skirt. Her tote bag bumped against her hip as she locked the door. She waved to the mailman, who remembered her because she always asked about his wife's surgery. At 7:40, she climbed into the beige Toyota Corolla, adjusted the mirror, and drove toward the elementary school. It was her second to last week before summer break. She planned to stay late to help box up classroom supplies and finalize lesson plans for September. Her co-teacher, Janet Fields, recalled their conversation that morning. Mary Lou had laughed about a student who tried to feed goldfish crackers to the class turtle. She said she was going to bring watermelon slices for the kids on Friday, Janet remembered later. Just a little treat before summer. At school, Mary Lou moved through her routine with her usual calm precision. Attendance sheets, chalkboard notes, reading time at 9:15. When the principal visited classrooms, he noticed Mary Lou's students sitting cross-legged on the carpet, quiet and attentive. He wrote a note for her personnel file that said, "Exceptional classroom control." During lunch, she ate in the teacher's lounge, tuna sandwich, apple, and a bottle of lemonade from the vending machine. She mentioned that she was meeting her sister Elaine that weekend to look for curtains. Her mood was light. There was no sign of worry, no hint of fear. That's what makes stories like this impossible to comprehend. Nothing feels wrong until it does. 1 hour, life moves on rails. The next, it jumps the track. After classes dismissed, Mary Lou stayed behind to clean her room. Janet left around 4:30. By 5, the janitor saw her still erasing the board. He remembered she smiled and said, "Almost done." No one saw her leave the building, but she likely walked out the side door just after 5:15. The temperature was still near 90, the air heavy and still. Her car was parked at the edge of the lot under a power line that hummed faintly in the heat. She rolled down the window and turned on the radio for the drive home. The DJ played time after time. At 5:25, she stopped at Miller's Grocery on Linden Avenue to pick up milk and bread. The cashier, a teenage boy named Kenny, remembered she seemed cheerful. She paid with a $5 bill and told him to keep the change for the tip jar. The receipt found later in her purse confirmed the time, 5:27 p.m. From there, the drive home took less than 10 minutes. She would have passed the church, the laundromat, and the little park with the yellow slide. She probably didn't notice the man sitting in the truck parked along the curb. No one did. At the time, he was just another neighbor waiting for traffic to pass. Tom came home from the factory around 6:30. Mary Lou greeted him at the door, still wearing her school clothes. They ate dinner, leftover casserole, and sweet tea, while the box fan hummed in the background. They talked about bills, about whether to drive to Kettering that weekend to look at a house listing. Tom said she seemed tired but happy. At 7:30, he left for his night shift. He remembered she walked him to the door, kissed him, and said, "Don't forget the donuts tomorrow." It was a small joke between them. He always brought home glazed ones after payday. She smiled. He said she looked like a woman with plans. That's the image he carries. That's where his memory stops. By 8 o'clock, daylight faded. Streetlights flickered on, throwing pale halos over the pavement. Mary Lou washed dishes, wiped the counter, and switched on the radio again. Neighbors later said they heard music drifting from her kitchen window. Something soft, maybe Carpenters or Chicago. She might have been humming along. At 8:20, a neighbor saw her step outside to bring in the mail. She waved. Nothing seemed unusual. What happened after that hour has been reconstructed only through inference. The best guess is that she decided to take her usual evening walk to the corner store. She'd mentioned running low on milk. The store was 3 blocks away, 10 minutes round trip. A walk she had taken 100 times. She locked the apartment door behind her. The porch light buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and diesel from a passing bus. She turned left, toward Greenwood Avenue. Her footsteps fell in rhythm with the chirping of cicadas. Somewhere behind her, a screen door opened. Someone else stepped out into the night. Someone who had been waiting for that exact moment. The store clerk that night was the same boy, Kenny. He told police later that he didn't remember seeing her. If she came in, it was before 8:40. The register tape from that hour was lost. Standard paper roll replaced the next morning. No record. No transaction. At 8:45, a patrol car drove past Linden Avenue. The officer, Dan Price, reported nothing unusual. Traffic was light. People were still out walking dogs. He remembered hearing crickets and a single radio playing from a porch. At 9, Mrs. Harper downstairs heard the creak of Mary Lou's stairway. She assumed her tenant had come home. The steps stopped midway, then nothing. No door closing. No movement above. A minute later, she heard what she thought was a car starting, maybe a door slam. She didn't look out the window. She told police she wishes she had. By 9:15, Tom Jenkins was halfway through his shift at the GM plant. He didn't know that at home, his wife's evening walk had intersected with danger. He wouldn't know for another 9 hours. At 9:30, a light rain started. It was brief, barely enough to wet the sidewalks. The streetlights reflected in the puddles, yellow circles stretching across the road. A passerby named Larry Dunn, walking his dog, saw a beige Corolla parked crooked at the curb near Greenwood. The driver's door was shut but not fully latched. He thought someone had simply forgotten to close it properly. He kept walking. That small moment would later haunt him. At 10, Mrs. Harper looked up at the ceiling. The radio that usually played in Mary Lou's apartment was silent. The fan still whirred. She assumed her tenant had gone to bed early. At 10:30, she turned off her lights. Outside, the rain stopped. A single police cruiser passed again, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. The next day began like any other. Tom came home a little after 6 a.m., exhausted but expecting coffee and chatter. The apartment was quiet. The bed was empty, the sheets untouched. He thought maybe she had left early for school. Then he saw her tote bag still on the chair, her keys missing, her shoes by the door. He felt a sudden pulse of unease, sharp and cold. He called her school. No answer. He called her sister Elaine, then his mother-in-law. No one had heard from her. By 8:30, Tom drove to the police station. He filed a missing person report. The desk officer wrote, "Possible domestic misunderstanding" in the margin. Tom's hands shook as he explained that his wife never stayed out, that she was dependable, that she always called. By noon, patrol officers began canvassing the neighborhood. They asked the usual questions. Did you see her? Hear anything? Most people had been watching TV or asleep. One neighbor remembered the rain. Another thought she heard shouting but couldn't be sure. No one could say where Mary Lou went after 8:30. That evening, detectives found her car. It was still parked near Greenwood Avenue, the driver's door slightly ajar. The interior light had burned out the battery. Inside, her purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet intact, cash untouched. Her tote bag was gone. They dusted for prints, photographed everything. Rain had washed most of the traces away. But under the driver's handle, they found one partial smudge too faint for comparison by 1984 standards. It would stay in the file, logged, and forgotten. The search expanded quickly. Volunteers combed empty lots, wooded areas near the river, drainage ditches. Helicopters flew low, their spotlights sweeping over fields. Posters went up on telephone poles with her photo and the words, "Missing Teacher." News crews arrived by the weekend. Dayton wasn't used to this kind of story. People started locking their doors for the first time in years. Tom spent every free hour looking. He walked the route she might have taken, calling her name until his throat went raw. He refused to sleep in their bed, choosing the couch where he could hear the phone if it rang. It rang constantly, false leads, cruel jokes, tips that led nowhere. Detectives worked in shifts. They interviewed coworkers, students' parents, ex-boyfriends, anyone with proximity. Everyone said the same thing. Mary Lou had no enemies. She was kind. She was steady. She was safe. But safety is often an illusion. And on that Tuesday night, the illusion finally cracked. The timeline they later reconstructed from witness statements is painfully short. 8:20 p.m., seen collecting mail. 8:30, possibly at the corner store. 8:45, patrol car passes. Nothing unusual. 9. Footsteps on the stairs. 9:15, car door sound. After that, nothing. 9 minutes of movement. That's all it took to erase a life. When Detective Dana Keller reviewed those details decades later, she stood at the same intersection at the same hour. She said the air felt heavy, the same way witnesses described it in '84. She said she could hear her own heartbeat. And she said the street looked so ordinary, it was hard to imagine anything terrible could have happened there. But it did. That last normal day became the spine of the entire investigation. Every timestamp, every detail, every witness statement built around it. It's the day investigators replayed for 41 years, trying to spot the frame where everything turned. In the end, they realized the answer had been under Mary Lou's fingernails the whole time. A microscopic record of the fight she never had a chance to finish. But that truth, hidden in a sealed envelope, was still decades away. For now, all anyone in Dayton knew was this. A beloved teacher vanished between one porch light and the next. A husband waited by the phone. A community lost its innocence. Tomorrow would bring the search, the panic, the rumors that never quite died. But for Mary Lou Jenkins, July 17, 1984, ended the way all tragedies begin. Quietly, on an ordinary street, with one person walking home, and another waiting in the dark. The next morning, the heat returned like a held breath. Dayton shimmered under a pale haze that made every surface look soft and unreal. Detective Raymond Cook was on duty when the call came in. A missing teacher, 23, last seen the night before. He read the report twice. Newlywed. No history of mental illness. No reason to leave. He underlined one sentence in his notebook. Husband reports car found, door ajar. By the time he reached Linden Avenue, the street was already filling with uniforms. A patrol cruiser blocked the corner. A half-dozen neighbors watched from porches, clutching coffee cups like talismans. The small apartment building looked normal: white siding, faded shutters, a row of geraniums on the windowsill, but Cook knew that normal never lasted. Tom Jenkins stood near the steps, exhausted and pale. He had been up all night. His work clothes still smelled faintly of oil and metal. He tried to describe his wife's routine, her habits, her certainty. He kept saying the same phrase, "She doesn't just leave." Cook listened. He had heard variations of those words before. But something in Tom's tone made him believe it. It wasn't panic. It was confusion, like a man who had lost gravity. Inside, the apartment was still. The air carried the faint scent of detergent, and something else, apples maybe, from her perfume. Everything was tidy. Dishes washed, bed made, towels folded. On the kitchen table sat 2 mugs, one rinsed, one half full. The coffee ring dried into a perfect circle. The calendar on the wall read July 1984, with small, neat handwriting, Friday movie night. Cook opened drawers gently. No signs of struggle. No broken glass. The only thing missing was Mary Lou's purse and her house keys. He made a note, then walked into the small bedroom. On the dresser lay a jewelry box. Inside were simple pieces, thin gold bands, stud earrings, a small cross necklace. He recognized the type of woman who kept things neat out of habit, not vanity. On the nightstand, a paperback copy of A Wrinkle in Time sat open to the middle. The bookmark was a grocery receipt dated the day before. He looked around once more and felt the strange stillness that hovers in homes right after someone disappears. The air feels used but unfinished, like a sentence that stops mid-word. He called in the evidence techs. They photographed everything, dusted doorknobs, checked windows. The front lock showed no damage. Whoever she left with or whoever entered didn't force their way in. Downstairs, Mrs. Harper waited with trembling hands. She had baked muffins that morning, out of habit more than appetite. She told Cook about hearing the footsteps on the stairs the night before. Then the sound of a car door. Then, silence. She didn't see anyone, didn't look out the window. Her voice cracked when she said that part. Cook took her statement carefully. He'd learned that guilt can fog a witness's memory. He assured her she hadn't done anything wrong. Still, her eyes stayed wet and distant, like she was watching those moments replay. By mid-afternoon, the news had spread across Dayton. Local teacher missing scrolled across radio broadcasts. Reporters gathered at the curb by dusk. Neighbors whispered from porches. And for the first time in years, doors that had been left unlocked were bolted shut. The search started. Small officers on foot, checking the park, the grocery, the short route between. They knocked on every door within a 5-block radius. At first, no one had seen anything. But by evening, one man came forward. His name was Larry Dunn. He walked his dog along Greenwood Avenue every night around 9. He told detectives he saw a beige Corolla parked crooked near the curb. The driver's door looked open, maybe not latched. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. He pointed to the exact spot. Detectives marked it with tape. The Corolla was already in police custody by then. Tom had found it that morning and called it in. It sat behind the station, hood still beaded with dew. The engine cold. Inside, the passenger seat held her purse. Her wallet, cash, and ID were untouched. On the floorboard, one of her shoes, a black flat with a scuffed toe. The second shoe was missing. The car's clock read 9:02. No one knew if that was when the engine died or when she fought. The lab techs dusted the handle, mirrors, and steering wheel. Most prints belonged to Mary Lou or Tom. But on the exterior, beneath the door handle, they found a faint smear, unusable by the technology of the time, but logged carefully. In another era, that trace might have solved everything. The first 48 hours are everything in a missing person case. That's what Cook told his team as they gathered in the cramped squad room that night. He ordered grid searches from the apartment to the river. He brought in volunteers, canine units, and even the Civil Air Patrol to scan from above. By the next morning, flyers went up in grocery stores and gas stations. A photo of Mary Lou, smiling at a school picnic, printed in black and white. Beneath it, missing. Last seen July 17. Please call Dayton PD. Reporters filmed the search parties forming along the riverbank. The footage showed volunteers in jeans and sneakers, wading through tall grass with sticks. Someone's transistor radio played faintly in the background a song about summer love. It made the scene almost unbearable. Elaine Jenkins arrived that afternoon, clutching a purse too small for what she carried inside. Tissues, a notebook, a photo album. She went straight to the apartment. The sight of her sister's untouched things broke her composure. She sat on the bed, hands shaking, whispering. She hated leaving the bed unmade. Cook gave her space, then asked gentle questions. Did Mary Lou have enemies? Had she mentioned anyone new? Any recent arguments? Elaine shook her head each time. She didn't even like conflict in movies, she said. That night, Tom refused to leave the apartment. He sat by the window with a flashlight, staring at the street. Officers offered to post a cruiser outside, but he said no. He wanted to be the first to see if she came home. At 3 a.m., Cook drove past the building. He saw the beam of Tom's flashlight flicker behind the curtain. He kept driving. By Thursday, July 19th, the case had shifted. Detectives were no longer calling it a disappearance. They were calling it a likely abduction. That word changed everything. The FBI offered limited assistance guidance on protocol, composite sketch artists, access to behavioral analysts. Cook welcomed it. He knew the local department didn't have much experience with cases like this. Dayton's homicide rate that year was low. The last major missing persons case had been a runaway teenager who turned up safe. The press conference that afternoon drew half the city. Tom stood beside Cook, gripping the podium with both hands. He read from a prepared statement but faltered halfway through. "If anyone has her, please let her go," he said. The words cracked mid-sentence. Reporters caught it. The footage aired on every channel that night. Behind the scenes, investigators were already building a list of suspects. Ex-boyfriends, former co-workers, transient workers near the construction site off Linden. Every man within a mile radius with a record. Among those names buried in the middle of the list was one, Harold Brenner. At the time, it meant nothing. He'd been home with his mother that night. He owned a small pickup and worked steady hours. Police interviewed him briefly as part of their canvass. He said he didn't know the Jenkins family. He seemed polite, even nervous to be questioned. The officer noted, "Cooperative, no further inquiry." And just like that, his name slid back into anonymity. The kind of oversight that only becomes visible decades later. Cook's team collected what evidence they could. They found partial shoe prints near the car, smeared by rain. They found a cigarette butt beneath the lilac bushes behind the building. They found nothing else. Forensics at the time couldn't extract much from any of it. They sent fibers from Mary Lou's blouse to the state lab. They ran fingerprints against local databases. Every test came back inconclusive. The lab report, typed in courier font, ended with a line that would become hauntingly ironic. Samples preserved for potential future testing. By Friday, the case had consumed the town. The school where Mary Lou taught closed early for a vigil. Children placed paper flowers on her desk. Parents wept openly. The principal promised to keep her position open until she comes home. No one said what everyone was thinking, that she would not. That night, Cook returned to the apartment alone. He liked to revisit scenes after the chaos died down. Sometimes the quiet revealed things people missed. He stood in the living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. He stared at the half-drunk cup of coffee still on the counter, dried to a ring. He thought about how short the walk was between her door and where her car had been found. He thought about how someone could have been waiting, watching that window night after night. He didn't know that 41 years later, another detective would stand in that same spot and think the same thought. He opened the kitchen drawer and found a small spiral notebook, Mary Lou's lesson plans. On the last page, she had written a reminder in careful penmanship. "Buy paper hearts for classroom craft Friday." He closed the notebook and placed it back exactly where he found it. There was one more detail that stuck with him. On the bedroom dresser, beside the jewelry box, lay a tiny smudge of dirt. He'd brushed it away absent-mindedly that first morning. Later, when evidence photos were reviewed, the smudge appeared darker, thicker, like soil. He wondered for years if it had come from someone else's hand. Saturday morning brought rain. Search parties slogged through mud along the riverbanks. Volunteers found pieces of trash, clothing, a lost shoe that didn't match hers. Every discovery raised hope, then crushed it. Elaine stayed at police headquarters, calling hospitals, shelters, morgues. Every call ended the same way. No Mary Lou. By Sunday, July 22nd, the search was officially scaled back. Cook hated that phrase, scaled back. It meant defeat, dressed in bureaucracy. He drove the perimeter of the search zone one last time. He stopped near the park, rolled down his window, and listened. Just wind. Just the sound of cicadas, loud and unbothered. When he returned to the station, he wrote his weekly report. Under next steps, he listed: continue interviews, recheck vehicle, review phone tips, await lab results. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, keep evidence preserved for retesting. That small instruction, repeated over the years by different detectives, would keep Mary Lou's fingernail scrapings from being discarded during multiple evidence purges. It was a routine act that accidentally protected the key to solving her murder. But in 1984, Cook didn't know any of that. He only knew a woman was missing, a husband was broken, and a city was starting to lose its faith in safety. The apartment stayed sealed for weeks. Elaine came by once to collect clothes for the family. She stopped in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. Everything smelled like her sister, apple shampoo, paper, chalk. She whispered a prayer and left. The investigation rolled on through summer into fall, and each passing day dimmed hope. The apartment became a frozen exhibit in a story that no one wanted to finish. Neighbors moved. Reporters found new headlines. But for those who had seen the flashing lights that first morning, time never reset. Dayton had learned that monsters don't always come from out of town. Sometimes they mow your lawn. Sometimes they wave from across the fence. And somewhere, just 4 blocks away, Harold Brenner closed his garage door, wiped grease from his hands, and went back inside as if nothing in the world had changed. By Monday, July 23rd, the missing posters had faded in the heat. Rain streaked the ink so that her smile bled down the page. But the search didn't stop. If anything, the urgency sharpened. What began as a neighborhood effort was now a full-scale mobilization. Detective Raymond Cook stood before a room of officers and volunteers inside the Dayton Police Annex. A hand-drawn map covered one wall, dotted with red pushpins marking every place already searched: the river trail, the drainage ditches behind the factory, the abandoned houses near 5th Street. Still no sign of Mary Lou Jenkins. Cook's shirt stuck to his back in the heat. The air conditioning unit in the corner groaned uselessly. He looked over the group: men and women, off-duty firefighters, teachers, church members, even teenagers with flashlights and garden rakes. He thanked them for coming, told them what they already knew, that every hour mattered. "Someone knows something," he said. "We're going to find her." He didn't say alive. He couldn't. By afternoon, teams moved door to door along the east side. They checked sheds, garages, dumpsters. The smell of rot from summer trash hung in the air. Every alley buzzed with flies. People watched from their porches, pretending to help by pointing in vague directions. "I heard a car around 9, one said. "Maybe a scream, maybe a TV, said another. Every word went into Cook's notebook, even the contradictions. Reporters shadowed the searchers, their camera lights harsh against the brightness of day. The local paper ran the headline, "Teacher Vanishes Community in Shock." And for the first time, that word shock felt right. Dayton had never seen something like this. The Jenkins case became its heartbeat. Every diner conversation started with her name. Every open window turned into a rumor mill. That night, the first candlelight vigil gathered on the steps of Linden Avenue Baptist. 100 people stood shoulder to shoulder, holding flickering flames against the dark. Elaine Jenkins sat in the front row, clutching her mother's hand, both faces hollow from sleeplessness. Tom Jenkins stood behind them, motionless, jaw tight. When the pastor said, "Let there be light," Tom's candle shook. He whispered her name once, so softly no one else heard. Cook didn't go home that night. He sat in his unmarked car outside the church after the crowd dispersed, staring at the glow of melting wax on the steps. He thought of his own daughter, 19, home from college for the summer. He thought about how ordinary Mary Lou's last hours had been. How everything about this case seemed too simple to be solvable. Back at the precinct, phones rang nonstop. Tips poured in from across the county. Some were sincere possible sightings, cars that looked similar, strangers seen loitering near the grocery store. Others were malicious, prank calls from people chasing their 15 seconds of relevance. Cook listened to every one. He said later that he was afraid to ignore even a lie, in case the truth was hiding inside it. One call, logged at 11:47 p.m., stood out. A man claimed he'd seen a woman matching Mary Lou's description, walking near the old quarry, just outside town, around midnight the night she vanished. Cook dispatched a team immediately. They searched the quarry until dawn. Nothing. Just broken glass, beer cans, and the echo of their own voices bouncing off the limestone walls. By the end of the first week, fear had metastasized. Parents stopped letting children walk to school alone. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts. Newspaper carriers were told to stick to daylight routes. Dayton, once defined by factory whistles and porch conversations, became a city of drawn curtains. The police station turned into a command center. Maps spread across desks. Stacks of reports rose like paper towers. Cook barely slept. He showered at the station and lived on burnt coffee and vending machine sandwiches. He read every report himself, unwilling to delegate what might hold the one clue that mattered. And then came the first break, or what they thought was one. A farmer 2 counties over reported finding a woman's shoe in a field near a drainage culvert. Black flat, size 6.5. Cook drove there himself. When he saw the shoe lying in the mud, his stomach turned. It matched the one found in the car. He thought it was hers. The shoe was bagged, labeled, and sent to the state lab in Columbus. The result came back inconclusive. No prints, no blood, no fibers linking it to the Jenkins apartment. The tread was too common to trace. It might have been hers, or it might have been any woman's shoe discarded by chance. Still, Cook held on to it. He kept it on his desk for months, a reminder that the answer was close enough to touch but still out of reach. Elaine and Tom refused to give up. They made posters themselves, driving across Ohio to tack them to rest stop boards and truck stop doors. They called talk shows, wrote letters to editors, begged for coverage. Tom went back to work after 2 weeks, unable to afford more unpaid leave. Co-workers said he looked like a ghost. He stopped shaving. He carried her picture in his wallet and showed it to anyone who would look. He said the same words to everyone: "She was my whole life." Elaine stayed in Dayton. She started organizing volunteer searches every weekend, convinced that more eyes meant more hope. She created what she called Mary's Map, a hand-drawn chart of every lead, every sighting, every rumor. It filled her living room wall. By September, the paper had yellowed from heat and grief. The local newspaper began publishing weekly updates under the banner, "The Jenkins Watch." At first, the tone was sympathetic. Then it turned skeptical. Without progress, the public started to lose patience. Whispers began. Maybe Tom knew more than he said. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she had a secret. Cook hated those whispers. He'd seen what speculation could do to families. But even he couldn't deny that the longer Mary Lou stayed missing, the harder it became to defend what they couldn't prove. September brought storms. The river swelled, the air cooled, and hope thinned. Cook ordered divers to search again. They found nothing but debris bottles, tires, an old shopping cart. He expanded the search radius 20 miles in every direction. Still, nothing. By October, morale had collapsed. The Jenkins apartment stood empty, sealed behind police tape. The lease expired. Elaine collected the belongings herself, boxing up clothes that still smelled faintly of her sister's perfume. She kept one blouse for herself, the cream-colored one from that Tuesday. She said she wanted to keep the last day close. That fall, the police department hosted a community meeting to calm public fear. It didn't work. People demanded answers the detectives didn't have. One man shouted that the city was covering up a serial killer. Another accused the police of incompetence. Cook stood at the podium, hands gripping the edge. He said they were doing everything possible. He said they wouldn't stop until they found her. But even as he spoke, he could feel the words hollowing out inside him. Winter came early. Snow covered the sidewalks where flyers once hung. Mary Lou's face stared out from beneath layers of frost. The search officially scaled down in December. Unsolved. Pending further information. The Jenkins family held a memorial service at the same church where they'd prayed months earlier for her return. Tom sat in the front pew, his head bowed. He wore his wedding ring on a chain around his neck. Elaine read from the Book of Psalms. She said, "We don't bury her memory, we keep it alive." But even that hope sounded fragile. After the service, Cook walked alone through the snow-covered parking lot. He thought about his first week on the job 20 years earlier, full of certainty, and faith in process. Now he knew better. Some cases don't end, they just wait. He looked up at the overcast sky and made a quiet promise to the woman he'd never met. "We'll keep you safe in the files." That phrase would matter more than he ever guessed. The years blurred. New detectives rotated in, each reopening the Jenkins file, each hitting the same wall. The evidence, Mary Lou's car, her purse, the fingernail scrapings, the fibers sat preserved in storage. The typed notes yellowed, but the case number stayed active. Every decade or so, someone dusted it off and tried again. Each time, they came to the same dead end. Meanwhile, Dayton moved on. The GM plant closed. Linden Avenue changed hands. The city aged. But the people who'd lived through that summer still remembered. They told their children not to walk alone. They double-checked locks. The fear outlasted the facts. Tom Jenkins never remarried. He sold the car, left the state, and eventually stopped answering calls from reporters. Elaine kept the files. Every birthday, she wrote her sister's name in a notebook, next to the same line. Still waiting. Detective Cook retired in 1999. On his last day, he walked down to the basement evidence room. He asked to see box 84-0717, the Jenkins file. He opened it one last time. Inside were photos, a dried corsage from the vigil, and the bagged fingernail scrapings collected during the first search. He told the clerk to keep them under climate control. "Science gets better every year," he said. "Maybe one day it'll tell us something we can't see." He didn't know he was right. But in 1984, none of that existed. All they had was panic and paper and the sound of the city losing sleep. In the weeks that followed, Cook's team continued chasing shadows. A woman's body found near Cincinnati turned out to be someone else. A confession phoned in from a jail 2 states away proved false. Every lead faded. Every hope narrowed to a pinprick. By spring of '85, the Jenkins file moved to the cold case shelf. Its spine blended into the rows of manila folders labeled by year. No closure. No peace. But somewhere in that sealed evidence envelope, tiny flakes of skin and the faintest trace of blood, Mary Lou's final act of resistance waited. She had fought back. She had left a mark. And that mark, invisible to the technology of her time, would become the proof of everything. For now, though, Dayton moved under the weight of something it couldn't name. A teacher gone. A husband hollow. A detective who couldn't stop seeing that coffee cup on the counter. And somewhere, only a few streets away, the man responsible drove to work each morning, whistling to himself, as if the world were still good. It would take 41 years for the quiet hum of a lab machine to finish the story that began on Linden Avenue. The year was 2025. Technology had leapt farther than Detective Raymond Cook ever imagined. DNA analysis could now extract profiles from fragments smaller than a pinhead, from samples that had once been dismissed as too degraded to test. And in Dayton, a new task force had reopened the cold case backlog, starting with one that had haunted the department for decades. Jenkins, Mary Lou 1984. Detective Dana Keller was 38 when she unsealed the evidence box. She'd been 10 years old when Mary Lou disappeared. Her mother still told her never to walk alone after dark because of the teacher case. It wasn't just a file to Keller, it was part of her childhood, part of the city's mythology. She sliced open the seal on the evidence envelope marked nail scrapings, sample B. Inside was a cotton swab, yellowed but intact, sealed since the Reagan years. The label bore Cook's initials. She whispered to the air, "Let's see what you saw." The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation handled the testing. The lab was silent except for the whir of the sequencer. Technician Robert Lynn prepped the sample using a next-generation DNA kit designed for degraded evidence. Even so, expectations were low. 4 decades of temperature shifts could destroy genetic material. But when the first data stream appeared on the screen, Lynn's breath caught. It was faint, but clear, a partial male DNA profile. Not Mary Lou's. Not her husband's. Someone else's. By the next morning, the full sequence was reconstructed. Keller sent it for comparison through CODIS, the National DNA Index. She didn't sleep that night. She stayed in the office staring at the old photo of Mary Lou taped to her monitor. The one where she's smiling, holding a cupcake at a school picnic. So ordinary. So alive. At 8:14 a.m., the email arrived. CODIS match found. The name made Keller go still. She read it once, then again. Harold A. Brenner, DOB, 1954. The name was familiar from the old notes. Cook's initial interview, 2 paragraphs long. Neighbor 4 blocks away, cooperative, no further inquiry. But Harold Brenner was no longer just a name. He was a 71-year-old retiree living in nearby Kettering. A widower, Sunday churchgoer, active in the neighborhood watch. The perfect neighbor again. Keller called her captain immediately. Within hours, they had a warrant for DNA confirmation. When they arrived at Brenner's home, he greeted them with polite confusion. "Detective? Is this about the break-ins last week?" He lived in a tidy brick ranch with a trimmed hedge and a flag out front. The image of safety. Keller introduced herself, explained it was a routine follow-up from an old case. She asked if he'd be willing to provide a DNA swab to rule out an old sample. He hesitated only briefly, then agreed. Of course, anything to help. The swab took seconds. The match came back within 12 hours. It was perfect. 100% identical to the DNA under Mary Lou Jenkins's nails. The arrest happened quietly on a Thursday morning. 2 unmarked cars rolled up to Brenner's driveway. He was watering his lawn, wearing khaki shorts and an Ohio State t-shirt. When Keller approached with the warrant, he didn't run. He didn't argue. He simply turned off the hose, nodded once, and said, "I wondered when this day would come." Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, stunned. To them, he was the man who fixed fences, who brought casseroles to potlucks, who mowed lawns for widows. No one could reconcile that image with the words the news anchor spoke that night. Arrest made in 1984 murder of local teacher. At headquarters, Brenner waived his right to counsel for the first hour. He sat across from Keller in a gray interrogation room, hands folded neatly, like a man waiting for church to start. He looked older than his age, thinner, pale, hair white as paper. But his voice was steady. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he said. "I just wanted to scare her." Keller didn't speak. She waited. He began to talk. He told her he'd seen Mary Lou often at the store, walking home, watering her porch plants. He said she reminded him of someone he used to know years before. He'd followed her a few times, just to see where she lived. That night, he saw her leave her apartment around 8:30. He parked his truck nearby and waited. When she passed the alley near Greenwood Avenue, he grabbed her from behind. "She fought," he said quietly. "She was strong." He said the words like a confession and a compliment at once. "She scratched me, right here," he said, pointing to his forearm. "That's probably where you got the DNA." Then he smiled, thin, tired, almost proud. Keller felt the weight of 41 years compress into that room. She thought of Cook, long gone. Of Elaine Jenkins, who had kept every clipping. Of Tom, who died in 2003, still wearing his wedding ring. And of Mary Lou, who had fought long enough to leave proof behind. Prosecutors moved fast. Forensic evidence, confession, corroboration, the case was airtight. Brenner was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. He declined to plead. He didn't deny it either. He simply said, "It doesn't matter anymore." At trial, the courtroom filled beyond capacity. Reporters packed the aisles. Elaine Jenkins sat in the front row holding a handkerchief that had belonged to her sister. When the forensic pathologist described how Mary Lou's DNA had been preserved under Brenner's skin cells, Elaine closed her eyes and whispered, "She fought." The defense tried to suggest contamination. They said the samples were too old. But the chain of custody was flawless. Cook's meticulous notes, the original seals, the digital retesting logs all preserved like scripture. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentence: life without parole. The day after the conviction, Detective Keller visited the evidence room one last time. Box 84-0717 sat on a metal shelf, unchanged since the 80s. She lifted the lid and stared at the coffee-stained mug, the calendar, the crime scene photos. Then she added one more item, a copy of the newspaper from that morning. Headline: Justice at last for Dayton's missing teacher. She closed the box gently and whispered, "Case closed." Outside, it was raining. Not the hard, punishing rain of summer storms, but a soft, steady drizzle. The kind of rain that erases chalk lines and cools the air after decades of heat. Keller stood under the overhang of the police building and let it hit her face. In the quiet between drops, she thought about how ordinary it all had been. A woman walking home. A man waiting in the dark. A city that thought it was safe. A few months later, Keller met Elaine Jenkins at the Riverside Memorial Garden, where a small plaque now bore Mary Lou's name. Elaine was in her 60s, hair gray, eyes bright with something that wasn't quite peace but close to it. She handed Keller a folded letter. "It's for Detective Cook," she said. He was right. Science did it. They stood in silence for a while, watching the water move under the bridge. Elaine said she'd been dreaming of her sister lately, not of the crime, but of the ordinary things. The smell of chalk. The sound of her laugh. The way she hummed when she cooked. "It's like she came back," Elaine said. "Just long enough to tell me I can stop." Keller nodded. "She never stopped fighting," she said. "That's why we found him." The story ended where it began, in a small town that once believed terrible things only happened elsewhere. Now, the city remembers differently. Every year on July 17th, the elementary school where Mary Lou taught holds a memorial reading. Her former students, now adults with children of their own, bring flowers to the base of the plaque. They tell their kids about the teacher who loved books and kindness and who kept her promises, even in death. Detective Keller still drives past Linden Avenue sometimes. The duplex looks smaller now, the paint chipped, the world louder. But on quiet evenings, when the air hums with cicadas and porch lights flicker on one by one, she swears she can hear the faint echo of footsteps, measured, steady, like a woman walking home after a long day of teaching. Not frightened, not lost, just walking. And she thinks of that one fragment of DNA, sealed and waiting, like a message across time. Proof that silence isn't the end of the story. Proof that justice can still move through decades and dust, finding the truth one cell at a time. The city sleeps easier now. But somewhere, deep in the evidence vault, that old coffee cup still sits on the table, a ring of brown staining its rim. A reminder of a life interrupted, and of a promise finally kept.